So anyway, last week we began talking about different inyanim of being fruitful and being multiplied, and we spoke about one of the low-tech ways of having a child, and that is adoption. And I think we covered the different issues of adoption, the different ways you have to convert a child, and what a child can renounce his conversion if he or she becomes bar or bas mitzvah. And I think the last thing we talked about were the different halachas that can sometimes be very hard about yichud and negia. Again, yichud is a man being alone with a woman, which is normally going to be usher, and negia is like hugging, kissing, hand-holding, and the like. Now we know, just to remind you of the last subject, that between mother and son and father and daughter, there is no prohibition of yichud or chibuk v'nishuk. Chibuk means hugging and kissing, and that includes not just father, but grandfather, great-grandfather, and not just mother, but grandmother, great-grandmother. So that's not a problem, right? A father or a grandfather can always hug his daughter no matter what her age, and even if she's married already. It makes no difference, totally permitted. And the reason is because in a normal, healthy person, there is no sexual attraction. And since there's no sexual attraction, so the laws against hugging and kissing don't apply. Yeah.
I thought, isn't it because, like, anytime two people are forbidden to have relations, then yichud and negia don't apply there?
Well, that can't be the case. I'll tell you why. Let's consider a married woman. I certainly cannot have yichud with a married woman, even though she's forbidden to me, right? So it has to be forbidden because of incest. Yeah, that's the difference.
Incest or like two men can be all together because relations between two men is forbidden.
Well, I would say this. The reason why two men are permitted to be together is because if they're normally, if they're heterosexual, there is no sexual attraction. Now, it's not so simple if two gay men are allowed to be together. Some say two gay men are not allowed to be together because they're attracted to each other. See? So that's really the rule. The rule is that in incest, there is normally no sexual attraction. So the shaila was this. The shaila was when you adopt, let's say a married couple adopts a child, so the question is, I'm just reviewing a little bit, whether there'll be an isser of yichud or negia between the mother and the adopted son, or between the father and the adopted daughter. So most opinions, and this includes the Rebbe himself, takes the position that the rule of father to daughter and mother to son is only biological, only when it's biological, because it would be incest. But in the case of adoption, since they are not related actually, so all of these halachos would apply. Now that doesn't mean a baby. Remember the age. The age generally is the isser of yichud and chibuk v'nishuk kick in when a boy is 9 and when a girl is around 7. So a boy below 9 or a girl below 7, you don't have any of these problems. But once they hit 7, 9, you're going to have that issue. By the way, some people are machmir by a girl 3. That's, I don't know, you may have heard 3, but no, that's very, very strict. You don't have to follow that view. And this, remember, you understand that this is a big problem for a babysitter. This is actually a very, very big problem for a babysitter. If you are, let's say, you're already 14 or 15, okay, 20, whatever you are, and you're asked to babysit a boy that is 9 years old or more, you have a problem of yichud with that boy. You see, so one has to be aware of this.
Other people are home.
Oh, if other people are home, that's fine. But I'm talking about if you're a babysitter, I don't mean you're a mother's aide. I mean, you're a babysitter, meaning the parents went away. Now, if there are more than one boy, if there are 2 boys, so the halacha is, yichud is generally going to be permitted between a woman and 2 men. They act as chaperones for each other. But if it's only, and the sister can also be a chaperone, but if it's just a babysitter and 9-year-old boy, you have a real problem. And the same thing, if a boy does babysitting, which is a little less common, and the boy is babysitting a girl that's 7 or up, there is a problem of yichud. So one has to be aware of this. So the Rebbe took the position that all the laws of yichud and chibuk v'nishuk, that's negiah, chibuk is hugging and nishuk is kissing, apply to adopted children once they reach a certain age. And the Rebbe's position is in fact the majority position, meaning it's not just the Rebbe, but most poskim actually say that. But I had mentioned the interesting psak of the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Waldenberg, who was a very great posek in Yerushalayim, and he made the argument that the heter of father to daughter or mother to son is not based on biology, but it's based on the fact that when a parent raises someone from a very young age, there is naturally no sexual, there are sick people obviously, but in a normal healthy person, there will be no sexual desires. Therefore, Rav Goldberg ruled, as long as you adopt the child before the prohibited age kicks in, meaning I adopt the girl before she's 7, and I adopt the boy before he's 9, and most adoptions are way earlier than that, he says there is no iser of yichud, and there is no iser of chibuk v'nishuk, which is called negiah, even when they reach the age where it would be in. Now again, that is a minority opinion, but one should obviously talk to their Rav or their posek if they have this question. But it is a very, very important issue because if a child is deprived, particularly an adopted child, is deprived of physical affection, it might hurt the child in different ways. In fact, one might even say, it's a pretty strong statement, that if you're going to follow the rule that you can't hug your adopted child, then you have to think twice about whether you should adopt a child, that you're not able to show that requisite affection. Now, adoption does have many, many problems. For example, if a Kohen adopts a child, even if the child's Jewish, he does not become a Kohen. Right? It's obvious, right? Adopting doesn't make a child Jewish without conversion, and adoption doesn't make a child a Kohen. So I'll give you an example where this was actually a painful thing. More painful in Eretz Yisrael than in Chutz La'aretz. You know the Kohanim, there's something called Birkas Kohanim, right? Kohanim get up at the end of the repetition of the Amidah, and they bless the people. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Now, one of the main differences, I don't know if you see this, I don't know if you go to shul every day, but one of the main differences between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, this is very, very fascinating, is how often do the Kohanim bless the people? In Chutz La'aretz, among Ashkenazim, and this is whether Hasidim or Misnagdim, Birkas Kohanim is only recited on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos even, only on Yom Tov. Right? So this is called duchening in Yiddish. Duchening just means getting up on the platform, whatever. So duchening is only done on Yom Tov. In Yerushalayim and in most of Eretz Yisrael, duchening is done every single day. Every single day, regular Monday, Sunday, right? We did it this morning. If there's a Kohen, if there's no Kohen, you don't do it. Well, let me digress a little bit because it might be an interesting little bit of knowledge that maybe you never discussed, and that is, the Torah says there's a mitzvah for Kohanim to bless the people. Actually, it's Hashem that's blessing the people through the Kohanim. So, logically, it should be done every day. Like, it's a mitzvah, like davening, like Kriya Shema. So,
Like out of Israel, we're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. In other words, what we're doing in Israel is normal and logical. So why did it develop in Chutz La'aretz that you only do it on Yom Tov? It's a little bit of a mystery. And the Ramah writes, right? The Ramah was the main, Rav Moshe Isserles, who lived in the 1500s. He was the main posek for Ashkenazic Jewry. The Ramah gives a very funny reason. It's a strange reason. The Ramah says, because in order for a Kohen to give a bracha, the Kohen must have a joyous heart. Only when the Kohen is in simcha, he's able to give a bracha. Because the simcha you have is the conduit that brings Hashem's blessing into the world. And in Chutz La'aretz, we're never really happy, except on Yom Tov. Even on Shabbos, we're not that happy because life is hard. And simcha is only on Yom Tov. Masha'en Ken in Eretz Yisrael, we could be b'simcha every day of the year. This is a very, very strange reason because it is so subjective. I mean, what do you mean a Kohen is not B'Simcha? I mean, I could probably identify Kohanim, Hasidic Kohanim, who are always B'Simcha in America, and I could identify some Kohanim in Israel who are never B'Simcha, even on Yom Tov. I mean, it's a very strange thing to condition the halacha on such a subjective assessment of who is B'Simcha, who is not B'Simcha. Because of this, there were great, great rabbis who wanted to change this rule, and they wanted to start duchening in America, even during the week. But every time they tried to do it, there was a sign from Shemayim that Hashem didn't want it. Like the shul burnt down, there was a fire, something collapsed, as if Hashem is saying, this is a special madrega, a special level that we only keep for the land of Israel. So that is a big difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. But even Eretz Yisrael, I don't know if you've traveled around a little bit and noticed this, there are some differences. And that is, in Yerushalayim, we duchen every day that there's a Kohen. But in the Galil, in Tzfat and Tiberia, they duchen not every day, but they duchen every Shabbos. Every Shabbos, which is different than Chutz La'aretz. So we have three different types of customs. In Chutz La'aretz, we only duchen on Yom Tov. In Yerushalayim and in most of Eretz Yisrael, we duchen every day. And in Tzfat and in Tiberia, we duchen every Shabbos. So there's actually three different customs. Now, can someone remind me, why did I start talking about Birchas Kohanim? I don't even remember.
This is a problem that comes up.
Oh, yeah, adoption. Yeah, thank you. So here's the thing. There's a family I know. In fact, the father is a makubal, actually. And he happens to be a Kohen. And they have an adopted son. And they have biological children. So the adopted son doesn't want to daven with his father in shul. Because what happens is, every day, his father gets up and duchens with his other sons. But this boy cannot duchen because he's not a Kohen. So he feels stigmatized. He feels embarrassed. So he actually does not daven in the same shul with his father. In Chutz La'aretz, it wouldn't be so bad because during the week he could daven with his father. But in Yerushalayim, where they duchen every day, he would be embarrassed every day. So, these are things that can sometimes be very, very troublesome. By the way, just as another aside, Sfardim do duchen every day, even in Chutz La'aretz. So if you go to a Sephardic shul in Chutz La'aretz, there will be Birkas Kohanim every day. And I'm aware of the fact that some Gedolim, when they travel from Israel to Chutz La'aretz, and they're Ashkenazim, they will daven in a Sephardic shul because they want to hear the Kohanim give a bracha.
So the only place that does Birchas Kohanim every day is in Yerushalayim?
No, it's most of Israel. Most of Israel, meaning most of Israel except for some places north, like the Galil, it is very, very interesting. It's basically because the Jewish Ashkenazic settlements around Yerushalayim were the students of the Vilna Gaon, who actually held you should duchen every day, even in Chutz La'aretz, so they followed the Vilna Gaon. The Jewish settlements in the north are mainly Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, who didn't want to change from the Chutz La'aretz minhag. They wanted to keep it, but they made a compromise with the Sephardim that if they're not going to do it every day, they'll do it once a week. Because you know that the Baal Shem Tov's Talmidim, in fact, this is part of Chabad history too. The Alter Rebbe was a Talmid of the Maggid of Mezerich, right? You had the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov's successor was Rav Dov Ber of Mezerich, called the Maggid of Mezerich. And the Maggid, his Talmidim they became the great, great Rebbes. Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev was a Talmid of the Maggid of Mezerich. The Alter Rebbe was a Talmid, etc. There were the Nayim Elimelech, Rav Elimelech of Lezhensk, like all of the great famous Hasidic Rebbes were Talmidim of the first generation were the Talmidim of the Maggid of Mezerich. And originally, when the Maggid died, the Alter Rebbe was very young. He was the youngest of the Talmidim. Although Berditchever said he took all the good stuff from the Maggid, but he was the youngest of the Talmidim. And he was originally not like a Rebbe. He was originally like an assistant to Rav Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk. And Rav Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk went to Eretz Yisrael and took a lot of Hasidim, and that's when the Alter Rebbe became a Rebbe who created Chabad and everything else. So the Yishuv in Tiberia were largely Hasidim. The Yishuv of Yerushalayim were largely Misnagdim. And that's why Yerushalayim had different minhagim than up north, and it reflected itself in the Duchening. Now, today, of course, everything's a mix. You got Misnagdim up north, you got Hasidim in the south, and everybody's mixed up. But originally it was kind of Hasidim were up north, and Misnagdim were around Yerushalayim. That's how it was, and that's responsible for the Duchening. Okay, so that's kind of about adoption. And again, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to go over them. Remember, again, the simple idea that adoption does not make a kid Jewish. He has to undergo a conversion, which he or she can renounce when they become an adult. But they do not have to reconvert again. Okay. Now again, does a couple fulfill pru or vu by adoption? Rav Shlomo Kluger says yes, but most opinions say no. That if it's not your biological child, you do not fulfill pru or vu. Yeah.
I can't remember who I was talking about it to, but I was talking about the thing where when they turn bar or bat mitzvah and they can renounce their conversion.
Yeah.
And you said that it's like some people say up to a week, but this person was like, no, it has to be like in a minute or something.
No, it doesn't have to be in a minute. It's a little bit of an unclear zman. The zman basically is that if the person has behaved as if they are accepting the Torah, they lose the right to renounce. So that could be. It is possible that if on the day of their bar mitzvah they put on tefillin, they've already given up the right to renounce. But that's only if they didn't say they're still thinking about it. Meaning to say, if they put on tefillin and didn't say, I'm still thinking about it, that may stop them right away. But if they say, I'm putting on tefillin, but I'm not sure yet, then they have a few days to think about it. They have to kind of reserve their rights in that way. But your friend is correct. If they did mitzvos and they didn't say that they're in doubt, that may take away their right to renounce. Okay? Alrighty. And remember, too, I mentioned that this is only true if they knew they had the right to renounce. If they didn't find out about that till years later, they could renounce it then. Right? They have to know this halacha. Okay. So now let's talk about another way to have kids, which is very interesting. Let's talk about sperm donors. Let's imagine that a man is infertile. That means the man either doesn't produce sperm, or his sperm is low, it doesn't have enough, or the semen has a low sperm count, whatever it is, that he cannot have a child. So we have men who donate sperm, right? They give sperm to sperm banks, etc. And the question becomes, what happens if a woman, or is a woman allowed to get impregnated with what's called donor sperm, right? Donor semen, and what effect would that have? So let's make the obvious point. If a woman is impregnated with donor sperm, her husband certainly does not fulfill be fruitful and multiply, because biologically it's not his child. He may adopt the child, and that's very common. It's very common if a woman has a child from a sperm donor. Effectively he'll adopt the child, but so what? It's not his child, and he's not going to be Makayim, Pru or Vu. Okay, so that's fine. So let's assume he's not Makayim, Pru or Vu, but still, is it permitted for her to do this? So here I need to go over a very, very famous, controversial, and bitter machlokas between two great Gedolim, Rav Moshe Feinstein and the Satmar Rebbe. This goes back to the 1960s and early 1970s. The Satmar Rebbe, you probably have heard of for other reasons. The Satmar Rebbe was known to be extremely anti-Zionist. He was against the state of Israel, etc. He also had his own disagreements with Chabad, which is a separate issue, but he was against the state of Israel, known to be anti-Zionist. His followers are the Mea Sharim Jews who don't accept the state of Israel in any way. although there's an interesting story about this. In 1968, when Nixon was running to be president, and he won, Nixon won, but the Democratic candidate was Hubert Humphrey. I don't know if you know your history a little bit. Hubert Humphrey was Lyndon Johnson's vice president, and he was running to be president in 1968, and he was trying to get the Jewish vote. So he was told, if he goes to Williamsburg in Brooklyn, there's a lot of Jews in Williamsburg, and he could talk to them about his connection to the Jewish community. Now, in Williamsburg, most of the Jews are Satmar Hasidim, right? Crown Heights is Chabad, Williamsburg is Satmar. So Humphrey comes to speak in Williamsburg, and he has a translator because they don't know English, they know Yiddish, and he's speaking to 10,000 Satmar Hasidim, and the Rebbe is there, and the Satmar Rebbe is there, and Hubert Humphrey is talking about what a committed Zionist he was. He's saying, I am a friend of the Jewish community, I support the state of Israel ever since 1948, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of his aides is Jewish, and he notices that the crowd is not so happy with this whole speech. So he realizes that Humphrey is talking about Zionism to the wrong audience. So after the speech, the person goes over to the Satmar Rebbe, and he apologizes. Humphrey is a guy, he doesn't understand the politics of the Jewish community. Forgive him, he means well. And the Satmar Rebbe said a wonderful thing. The Satmar Rebbe said, listen, this is perfectly fine. He says, I am against the state of Israel, and I believe there shouldn't be a state of Israel. But if Israel is being attacked by enemies, I want them to have the weapons to be protected. I want them to disband on their own. But chas v'shalom, that a single Jew should be hurt. So if Humphrey wants to give the Israeli army weapons to protect itself against Arabs who want to kill them, I'm supportive of it. He says, this is a family fight. This is within our family. We have disagreements. But these Yidden are still our family. It's a beautiful story, although I've heard from some Satmars, they say it's not true, it's a made-up story. So I would hope it would be a good story. But I'll tell you, in reality, I don't want to get into something controversial because I know it's a Chabad seminary, but in reality, this story is somewhat similar to Chabad's position. If you go back to Chabad in the 1920s, the Rebbe Rashab, when they were first talking about a Jewish state, the Rebbe Rashab was also against the Jewish state. He says, until Mashiach comes, you're not supposed to have a state. You're not supposed to have a state. The statehood is when Mashiach comes. Mamish like Satmar. But what happened was, and this is the Rebbe's hashkafa, once you have a state, and once you have millions and millions of Jews here, we can't abandon them. We can't forget about them. We have to take care of them. So the Rebbe was in favor of strengthening the security of the state, not because he was a Zionist, but it's because he was a lover of the Jewish people. That's an important chiluk. I don't know if Chabad always makes that clear. But the Rebbe, who was a great Zionist in the sense of strengthening the state, was not because of a Zionist philosophy. It was because of the millions and millions of Yidden who live here that you have to take care of them. You can't abandon them. So in a sense, it's kind of what the Satmar Rebbe is saying in the story, that I'm against the state of Israel, but I don't want any Jews to be hurt, and we got to protect the Jews. Okay, but going back to the main thing, the Satmar Rebbe said the following about, this is called artificial insemination. In fact, technically it's called AID, which is artificial insemination with donor sperm. Here's what the Satmar Rebbe said. If a Jewish married woman is impregnated with donor sperm, she is guilty of committing adultery. That is adultery. 1. Number 2, a woman who commits adultery voluntarily, without not rape in other words, is not allowed to stay married to her husband. Her husband must divorce her. Number 3, a child born from adultery, which includes sperm impregnation, is a mamzer who is not allowed to marry other Jews other than a mamzeret or a gioret. We talked about mamzer, right? I think we did. Mm-hmm. Again, let me remind you, a child born out of wedlock is not a mamzer. Okay, remember that, 100%. But a child born out of adultery is a mamzer. And the Satmar Rebbe equates sperm donation, insemination, to mamzeret, to adultery. Now that's pretty tough stuff. Obviously, like the Satmar Rebbe, there's no way a woman could be impregnated with donor sperm. She would have to leave her husband and the kid would be a mamzer. Right? This is the Satmar Rebbe's position. Rav Moshe Feinstein disagreed with the Satmar Rebbe on everything. Rav Moshe Feinstein said, a woman is not guilty of adultery unless there is sexual intercourse, and injecting sperm into her body is not sexual intercourse. That's number one. Number two, the child that is born from that insemination is not a mamzer, because a mamzer too has to be generated from prohibited adulterous sexual intercourse. Now, Rav Moshe concedes that the husband is not makayim pru or vu. That much is true. But he says, no adultery, no mamzer. But he comes up with another reason why he says it's not a good thing to do. Nevertheless, Rabbi Feinstein discouraged use of sperm donors because of a problem that he identified as potential future incest between half-siblings. Right? Do you get that? The problem is this. Sperm donors tend to do this over and over again because, there's no... Sperm donation, halakhically it's prohibited, but sperm donation is a lot easier than egg donation. When a woman donates eggs, she's under surgery and they cut into her body. Sperm donation does not require any of that difficulty. So, you get paid for it. So people who don't care about halacha, goyim or whatever, sperm donation is a common thing. A lot of medical students do it to get extra money. So here's the problem. Let's imagine woman number one gets impregnated from donor A and has a son. And woman number two gets impregnated from donor A and has a daughter. Now that son and that daughter have different mothers, but they do have a common father, the sperm donor. So they are half siblings, but they don't know it because they don't know who their father is. Anonymous sperm donor.
Is there no way to find out?
Usually not. So what's going to happen is, what if 20 years later, a boy marries a girl, and it turns out, and maybe we'll never find out, but it turns out that a half-brother is marrying his half-sister. Now, you may say to me, that's ridiculous, that's preposterous, that never happened. Number one, it has happened. It's already happened more than once.
How do we know?
Within Judaism?
How do we know?
Huh? Say again?
Within Judaism it happened?
Even within Judaism, yeah.
How did they find out?
Well, I'll give you one case. I'll give you one particular case where it was found out, and the guy's in jail now. There was a doctor in Northern Virginia who happened to be a Jewish doctor. He was a fertility doctor. And he had a real high success rate with all of his patients. Most infertility specialists have a success rate of around 30 to 40%. Meaning most people, they can't help, but 30, 40 is good for in vitro and other things like that. This guy had a success rate of 80%. So he was attracting so many patients because he really was good. 80%. It was discovered what he was doing is he was simply throwing away the sperm of all the men that gave sperm, in other words, for their wives, and he was substituting his own sperm. And because he was a very fertile individual, he managed to impregnate by in vitro, not in their body, impregnate like hundreds of kids. And that's why his rate was so high, because he wasn't working with infertile husbands. He was working with himself. He was using his sperm. Now, how they found out, I'm not sure. Maybe they did DNA testing, I'm not sure. But they found out that he was the father of like 100 children. And I think people pointed out, if this would not have been uncovered, statistically it would be almost certain that there would be some marriages between them, because they came out with a statistic. Now, this may not be true for Jews, for Orthodox Jews. They say that overwhelmingly people tend to marry other people who live within 5 miles of their home. You marry, the boy marries the girl next door, the girl marries the boy next door. Maybe in the frum world it's less so because, you go to Eretz Yisrael, you go to different places. But they say that all of these 100 people were within like 10-mile radius. They would meet. They would meet each other and the like. So there have been some cases. In fact, even today, kosher fertility programs like Mayanot Hospital in Borough Park. There are hospitals that try to do in vitro procedures according to halacha and everything. And we'll talk about the halachas. One of the things they have is a mashgiach, and the mashgiach makes sure that the sperm that is taken from the husband, not a donor, will be the thing that's used, and there's not going to be a switch. Just like you have a mashgiach in a restaurant to be sure that tray food is not brought in, so they have a mashgiach over the sperm to be sure that there's no switcheroos or.
Because of that case.
Well, because of cases like that. I don't know that. Not that. I don't know about that particular case, but you'll notice that if you live in Brooklyn and you see advertisements for religious fertility operations in hospitals, one of the things they will say is we have constant hashgacha or whatever it is to be sure there are no mix-ups or switches or the like. So Rav Moshe's time is like this. Rav Moshe's fear was he disagreed with the Satmar Rebbe. The Satmar Rebbe said the woman is guilty of adultery and the kid is a mamzer. Rav Moshe says no, the woman is not guilty of adultery and the kid is not a mamzer. But Rav Moshe said he was not in favor of it because of the hidden potential of a half-brother, marrying a sister 20 years in the future. Okay? You understand the problem of the half-sibling, the unknown half-sibling. Yeah. By the way, I've heard of cases, I haven't been personally involved, where people commented about how husband and wife seem to look the same. They have the same features. Like people say, you could almost be brother and sister. And they discovered after they were married that they are brother and sister. These things sound like they would never happen, but they have happened. They have happened. And Rav Moshe's point is that, they would have to get divorced. Yeah, I mean, it's very, yeah.
What would the Satmar Rebbe say for accidental artificial insemination?
If it's accidental?
Accidental.
Yes, according to Satmar, it's a very excellent point. And by the way, the notion of accidental is an interesting issue. Obviously, when we're talking about artificial insemination, we're talking about an intentional procedure. But the Talmud itself acknowledges the possibility of accidental insemination. And this actually goes by the category of a woman that got pregnant in a bathhouse or a mikveh. The concept would be this, again, it's a little bit gross. Man goes to the mikveh, there is some semen in the mikveh or bathhouse, and because of the warm water, it can preserve the semen. The semen can be alive in a warm medium. So then a woman goes in, and some of that semen goes into her body. The Talmud actually discusses the possibility of a woman getting pregnant in that way. This is called nisabra ba'ambati. That means she got pregnant in a bathhouse. Now, according to the Satmar Rebbe, she would not be guilty of adultery because this was not consensual, but the kid would still be a mamzer. Because mamzer does not depend on whether it's consensual or not. I'll tell you an amazing Tosfos about this. There is a book in the Apocrypha called the Book of Ben Sira. Are you familiar with the Apocrypha? The Apocrypha are books that are not part of our Tanakh. We don't consider them holy. They were written the same time, but the Chachamim decided that certain books are kadosh, and we include them in Tanakh, and certain books are not kadosh, and we exclude them from Tanakh. One example is actually most famous coming up, the Book of the Maccabees. Right, the Book of the Maccabees. We have the Book of the Maccabees, Sefer Chashmonaim. Now that's a kosher book, you can read it, but it's not a kadosh book. It's not part of Tanakh. So that's what Apocrypha is. Apocrypha just means those books that were excluded from the Tanakh. So one of the books, besides the Book of the Maccabees, which is the Hanukkah story, is a book called the Book of Ben Sira. Now, the Book of Ben Sira, if you read the Book of Ben Sira, you can read it, it's very similar to Mishlei, right? What's Mishlei? Mishlei is a sefer of Shlomo HaMelech that gives various proverbs about, it's Musar, it's a book of ethics, a book of morals, right? Mishlei, right? You open up Mishlei and you learn about how to live a righteous life. Now, Ben Sira seems to be almost the same thing. Proverbs about living a righteous life. So why does Mishlei make the Tanakh and Ben Sira is excluded from Tanakh, right? So we treat Mishlei as a book that was written with divine Ruach HaKodesh. Ben Sira is a book of wisdom, but it's not a book of Ruach HaKodesh. Now, what does the word Ben Sira mean? So you say his father's name was Sira, but what type of name is Sira? So it says that Sira actually means a bathtub. And his mother conceived him accidentally in a bath, in a warm bath. And his father is none other than Yirmiyahu the Navi that had a little bit of semen in the warm water. And therefore, on one hand, he's Yirmiyahu's son, so he has a high level of wisdom. But because this was not through normal marriage and normal relationship, he does not have Nevuah or Ruach HaKodesh. That's why his book is considered to be a book of wisdom, but it's not a book of prophecy and a book of Kedusha. Ben Sira, right? Ben Sira, book of Ben Sira. So it says Yirmiyahu went to a bathhouse, and there was a little bit of sperm that went into the warm water. And then a woman went into the bathhouse after him, and she got pregnant from the sperm, and she had a boy, and he was called Ben Sira, the son of the best. He's not a mamzer. Because the mother was not married. In those days, single women went to the mikveh.
Why would they not suspect her of having premarital sex though?
No, but even if she had premarital sex, it wouldn't be a mamzer. Remember, out of wedlock is not a mamzer. Even if she had intercourse with somebody, it wouldn't be a mamzer.
And he was Yirmiyahu's son?
Yirmiyahu's son, through this procedure.
How do you know it was Yirmiyahu?
It's recorded as a tradition. I'm not sure how they know.
This is in Gemara?
This is a medrash that Tosfos brings. It is not in the Gemara. But Tosfos in Chagiga brings this medrash about Ben Sira. The book of Ben Sira we have, but in the book of Ben Sira it does not say any of this. This is not in the book of Ben Sira, yeah.
So if he's not a mamzer, then why couldn't he have?
So he's not a mamzer. For sure he's not a mamzer. But the idea was that he was not born through a normal marriage between this woman and Yirmiyahu, and therefore he doesn't have the same kedusha. There's no mamzer problem, but it's not the same kedusha as.
He's not a mamzer.
No, remember, because he's born out of wedlock. She was a single woman. If she would have been a married woman, like the Satmar Rebbe, he would be a mamzer. Not like Rav Moshe. Like Rav Moshe wouldn't be a mamzer anyway. So, but as far as you know, she was a single woman. So this might even explain possibly some of the Christian maisim about virgin births. The whole business about how does Yashka's mother have a kid with. So possibly it happened with him too. Something like that, and the way. Right? So all sorts of crazy things can happen. This is called Nisabra Biambati, and that's the basis of the story of Ben Sira. Okay. The other term, the Hebrew term for the Apocrypha, are called Sforim Chitzonim. Sforim Chitzonim are the excluded books. Just a little note about the Apocrypha, just so you'll know what it is. Some books of the Apocrypha are totally kosher books, but they're just not holy books. So Ben Sira and the Book of the Maccabees, you're allowed to read them, you're allowed to study them. They're like Musar books, or Maccabees is history books. And it's mutter to read, but they're not Kodesh. They don't have the Kedusha of Tanakh. But there are other books of the Apocrypha that are heresy, that are Apikorsis and Kefira. Right? So the common denominator is they're excluded from Tanakh, but different reasons. Some are just excluded because they're not kadosh, but they're fine. Others are excluded because they have ideas that are keneged the Torah and keneged Chazal. So there's the Book of the Jubilees, Sefer HaYovelos, different things. In fact, if you ever...
Why would they even be discussed if they're...
Well, they were mainly preserved by the Goyim. These were books. Remember that the Jewish people had different sects. There were Tzedukim, there were different groups, and they wrote books. So our Chazal just threw away the books, didn't regard them, but other groups preserved the books, so we have to kind of know how to deal with them. I mean, you can buy the Apocrypha in English or Hebrew or whatever it is, and you'll have some of those books in there that are not considered to be proper.
So which are the ones that are?
So the two that for sure are proper are the Book of the Maccabees and Ben Sira. Those two books are proper. There are some others. I'd have to remember all the titles, but some of the books are improper. Some of the books
Why
are.
would Yovel be not kosher?
Well, because it has different ideas. In fact, if you ever read some of these books, you will see that they sound very Christian. A lot of Christian ideas either came from those books or those books were influenced by Christianity. So you'll see it describes Hashgad in certain ways, and it describes the way Hashem deals with the world in ways that are reminiscent of the Christian Bible. I think things like that. That would be a problem. Also, it's interesting. They also have. Well, it's similar to the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, we have all sorts of stuff that was found. You've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, also the same thing. The Dead Sea Scrolls are writings of Jewish movements that rebelled against Chazal and didn't accept the Torah Shebaal Peh. So most of the stuff in the Dead Sea Scrolls is also considered to be not according to the teachings of Judaism. Right? So the Apocrypha of the Dead Sea Scrolls are very similar. The academic experts who tend to study the Dead Sea Scrolls also tend to study the Apocrypha. It's all like together in that way. Okay. Alrighty. So that's what you need to know. Oh, I'm sorry. So then Rav Moshe says something else though. Let's say a woman is desperate. A woman really, truly wants to have a child, and her husband cannot give it to her. So Rav Moshe says, if a woman is really, really desperate, she can use an anonymous sperm donor. But listen to this. But there's one important condition. The sperm donor must be a goy and cannot be a Jew. Huh? I mean, if you had to guess, is it better to have a Jewish sperm donor or a non-Jewish sperm donor? I might have thought Jewish. He says, no, non-Jewish is better. Why is that so? This is a little complicated. Everybody knows that if a non-Jewish man impregnates a Jewish woman, the child is Jewish, right? Everybody knows that. Right? That's called the rule of matrilineal descent. That's a cornerstone of yichus in Klal Yisrael. But some people don't know the reason why. The reason why is because, according to halacha, a non-Jewish man has no paternity over a child born from a Jewish woman, meaning this child has no father, which means the following. If a guy impregnates a Jewish woman and has a son, and the same guy impregnates another Jewish woman and has a daughter, although biologically this son and daughter have the same father, halachically they are not brother and sister, because the non-Jewish father is not their father, and therefore neither of them has a father, halachically. Which means, as surprising as this is, do you get the hypothetical here? The boy can marry the girl. Because, now, a geneticist would not advise this. But halachically, it's not into. So Rabbi Feinstein said, if you use a Jewish sperm donor, then there is a problem that the boy and the girl 20 years from now are going to be related. But if you use a non-Jewish sperm donor, then even if the boy and the girl marry 20 years later, they're not siblings, halachically, because of the non-Jewish parentage, and therefore a non-Jewish sperm donor would be preferable, because this would avoid the hidden incest problem of a Jewish sperm donor. Now, Rabbi Feinstein then says that since in the United States the vast majority of sperm donors are non-Jewish, so if the woman doesn't know, she is permitted to assume that it's non-Jewish sperm donation. Masha'en Kain in Eretz Yisrael, where a majority of the sperm donors would be Jewish, she should not use that sperm donation because of the possibility of incest later. So again, it's not the Satmar Rebbe. The Satmar Rebbe said sperm donors is adultery and mamzer. Rav Moshe rejects the adultery and the mamzer, but he says there is a problem of hidden incest, and hidden incest will only be a problem with a Jewish sperm donor, not with a non-Jewish sperm donor. So Rabbi Feinstein said, if a woman is going to use a sperm donor, she has to be sure it's non-Jewish, or in the United States or outside of Israel, she can assume, right? This is the rule of majority. She can assume that the sperm is non-Jewish. Now, this absolutely, this you don't realize how bitter this was, because look at what Moshe Feinstein seems to be saying. He seems to be saying it's okay for Jewish women to be impregnated with sperm from non-Jewish men. That sounds horrendous, and many people were saying this is a destruction of the holiness of Am Yisrael. So Satmar not only protested Rav Moshe, but they burnt his books, they burnt him in effigy, they made like a picture of him and they set it on fire, etc. And Rav Moshe wrote a number of tshuvos defending his position. But what I would say is that practically, in the religious world, this is not done. Practically, a religious woman will not be impregnated with Jewish sperm because of Rav Moshe's problem, and even with non-Jewish sperm because it's not anything you want to fool around with. But be it as it may, be aware of this great machlokas between the Satmar Rebbe and Rav Moshe Feinstein.
How does that
Yeah.
answer why the Jewishness goes according to the mother? Did you say that answer?
Oh, I didn't. Well, no, I didn't say that was the reason, but I said, but that's the implication of it. In other words, it's not just you're Jewish if your mother is Jewish. It's because you don't have a non-Jewish father. It's as if there's no father there. The father is eliminated. There is no paternity that a non-Jew can have over the child of a Jewish mother. There is no paternal relationship. Okay, yeah.
Question. So if, let's say there's a non-Jewish man and a Jewish woman married and they have a child,
Yep.
and Chas v'Shalom the mother dies, who has custody over the child?
Okay, so technically, the child has no father. The child is orphaned. He has no father at all. Practically, a Beis Din would say that if the child emotionally identifies with this person as the parent, they would give custody to the parent. But the only thing is that they would want to be sure the child is raised as a Jewish child. So that's going to be another. There are two different issues here. One is who's the parent. The other is will the child be raised in a Jewish environment. I mean, if the child is not going to be raised in the Jewish environment, the Beis Din is not going to give the father custody. On the other hand, if he's a guy, he may not care what a Beis Din does. He'll go to secular court and he'll get custody in secular court. But in terms of halacha, he will get custody, but not because he's the father, but because he's the emotional support for the child, and that will be conditioned on the child having a Jewish upbringing, which I'm not sure how that's going to be possible if the person did not convert. Okay, so now let me mention another issue, which maybe is a delicate issue. Maybe it's not so tznius, but I'm going to mention it because I want you to at least understand the shaila. What about single women getting impregnated from sperm donors? I don't mean, God forbid, having sexual intercourse, but I mean that is obviously forbidden. But what about insemination? Now, the scenario here is something that can be very, very painful. Let's imagine you have a frum woman, totally frum, Beis Yaakov, totally religious. She would keep Shabbos, keeps kosher. She would never have sexual intercourse outside of marriage. Keeps mitzvahs, tznius. But she's approaching 40, and the biological clock is ticking. And she doesn't have a shidduch yet. And she desperately wants to be a mother, understandably so. And as I say, she will not be with somebody. So the question becomes, is it yitochen that maybe she could get pregnant through a sperm donor, and that way she could raise a child as a single mother until such time as she gets married. But at least, even if she never gets married, at least she'll have a child that she brought into the world, right? So what will we say halachically about sperm donation for a single unmarried woman. So as you would probably guess, the poskim don't like it. They haven't really given complete reasons why it's usher. Exactly what is the avera actually, but they say they don't like it, and there are different reasons they don't like it. One reason they say is there is a marisayan issue. Marisayan means appearances. Here you have single women who are going around pregnant. People will think that perhaps they're promiscuous with men, right? So, and even though they're not, marisayan. Right, marisayan is important. There's a book I read a few years ago. It's a good book. When I think it's out of print. When Black Becomes a Rainbow. Did you ever read that book? This is an interesting book. This was written by a non-religious woman whose daughter became very Haredi. And the woman writes about the conflicts between how did she learn to get along with her daughter, because her daughter became very, very ultra frum, and in Israel, and everything the mother did was wrong. Kind of, the father is kind of low-key, he's not involved so much. And the mother and daughter are always fighting, and eventually they come to this great shalom, this great rapprochement, etc. So every time the mother wanted to do something, take them to a restaurant and have kosher food, but the restaurant was treif, the daughter kept on saying, I don't know, marisayan, I don't know. And the mother didn't know what marisayan was. So she finally says, who is this marisayan you're always talking about? Like, he's watching you 24 hours a day. Marisayan, who is he? What are you so afraid of him? But marisayan, or marisayan, however you want to pronounce it, is an important rule in halacha. Meaning, it's not enough that you don't do averos. You're not supposed to do things that look like you're doing averos, right? Marisayan. Okay? So one problem with single women getting pregnant is it's a marisayan that they're being promiscuous, God forbid. That's one problem. A second problem is the opposite direction. It may give cover and excuse to women who are in fact promiscuous, meaning to say, if we could have pregnancies from anonymous sperm banks, then some women who are not sanua may chas v'shalom be nichshal in real averos, and they'll cover themselves. They're not going to be afraid or embarrassed because they can always say anonymous sperm bank. So that's the second reason, kind of the opposite. The third reason is that it may create incentives not to bother to get married. Because let's face it, marriage to men is a pain in the neck. And the men are always a pain in the neck. But if a woman wants to have a kid, she has to get married. But if she has a new option that doesn't need marriage, so a woman doesn't forget about marriage, I'll just be a mother. So we don't want to create disincentives to getting married. That's a third reason. And a fourth reason is more of a spiritual reason. Chazal tell us that every neshama, that comes into the world, is three partners. There are three partners in the creation of the neshama. There is the father, there is the mother, there is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that the Alter Rebbe himself writes that the nature and the elevation of the neshama of a child is connected to the kavana of the father and the mother when they are together. In other words, their machshava can draw the neshama down from a higher source. Again?
Father and the father, or just the father?
Both, for father and mother. The machshava can draw it down, etc. So the fear is that if there is no father, or the father just did it through a sperm donation, so to speak, that kavana was not there really. Right? There was no kavana to draw down a neshama. So perhaps the child is going to be spiritually, deficient in some way. Even though he's not a mamzer. Not a mamzer. Of course he's not a mamzer, but there may be a pagam. And so those are the different reasons that were given why people were against it.
Is it usher?
Say again?
Is it usher?
So they didn't use the word usher because it's not usher, but it's something that is not a proper thing. But there was one posek in Israel who did matter it, Rav Sherlau. His name was, he's Dati Liumi in the Mizrahi world, but he's a Talmud Chacham. And he said he would allow it, but only, gave conditions, only if the woman is at least 40 years old, so she's towards the end of the normal reproductive cycle, and she spent at least 10 years looking for a shidduch, meaning she really tried to find a shidduch. Now, obviously, those numbers are made-up numbers. You're not going to find in the Shulchan Aruch any particular thing, but he wanted to be sure that this wouldn't be done as an end run, not to get married, but it's kind of at the end of your rope when you don't have a choice. You do it that way. But otherwise, we say it is wrong lechatchila to bring a child into the world without an active father. Now, sometimes there is no father because the father might die while the woman is pregnant. I mean, that happens. But that's Hashem doing it. But for a woman to deliberately try to have a child without a father, some say that is upsetting or violating HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan for how families would be created. Now, there is another option for older women, which may work part of the time, and this is called egg freezing. Let's go back to the original situation. The woman is 40 years old, and she's a frum woman. Unfortunately, there are no shidduchim that are working out right now. She wants to have a child, and she's very, very afraid that even if she does get married eventually, it'll be too late. So, we talked about just now, can she be impregnated by sperm donor? And we basically said, not the best thing. Now, what you can do, though, is she could have her eggs taken out of her body and frozen for later use. Because let me explain something. When a woman goes into menopause, that means she's no longer ovulating. But she could still carry a baby, meaning the uterus can still carry a baby. So the way this works is, take out her eggs while she's still ovulating. They can be frozen. And even when she's 45 or 50 or 55, and she gets married, those eggs could be fertilized in an in vitro fertilization procedure and then transferred into her body, because even a postmenopausal woman can carry a pregnancy to term if you have an egg that was fertilized. So egg freezing can be something that could be very, very useful for an older single, but again, it's only going to work if she eventually gets a shidduch. I mean, he's not going to give her a child if she doesn't get a shidduch. But at least it can work in cases where she hopes to get a shidduch, but she'll be older, postmenopausal, and the like. Now, I don't know how old a woman can be. I don't know if a woman could carry a baby when she's 85 or 90. I mean, sorry, Mayanot did, but those were miracles. But certainly, 50, 55, there's no question that a woman can carry a baby to term, even if it's postmenopausal. In fact, I believe this was a dangerous procedure, but I believe a Jewish woman went to Russia and she gave birth to a baby at 65. She had to go to Russia because they wouldn't do the surgery in the U.S. It was considered to be too dangerous or whatever it is. For some reason in Russia they were willing to do it. Okay? So be aware of eggs.
She had a healthy baby?
She had a healthy baby, yeah, Baruch Hashem. And I think it was through an egg freezing thing. They took out the eggs when she was much younger, and then they used them many, many years later. So this is an important biological fact to be aware of, that a woman after menopause can carry a baby to term even though she's not ovulating anymore. Okay, so that would be a partial way of not having to use sperm donation and the like. Now, let's talk about another aspect of this. Let's talk about, so we've been talking about today.
This is halakhically permitted.
Say again, didn't hear you.
Freezing eggs is halakhically permitted.
Absolutely so. Yeah, there is no prohibition in freezing eggs for later use. Now again, removing eggs from a woman is not a simple thing. She has to go under general anesthesia, and there's a surgical procedure that's involved, but they do have something called laparoscopy, which is a kind of a surgery that's really very minimally invasive, like a little cut, and they can take things out. So laparoscopic surgery really cuts down the recovery period very, very drastically. So instead of like having to recover for 3 weeks, they can cut it down to 4 days or so. But there's still a recovery period. I mean, 4 days of recovery is 4 days. So it's not a simple thing, but they can do it much better than they used to do it, laparoscopy. Okay, so now we've been talking about what I call, not me, but AID, artificial insemination from a donor. Okay, meaning not the husband. And by the way, when I say AID, understand that I'm including two things. The original AID is when they injected the sperm directly into the woman's body and fertilization took place in her body. That's the older type of AID. Today, AID tends to be utilized with in vitro fertilization, meaning to say today, most of the time, not all the time, they still use the old type. Instead of injecting the sperm in her body, they actually extract an egg and they fertilize it in the test tube. That's called IVF, in vitro fertilization, and then they put it in her body. So when I say AID, I'm including both things. I'm including the old-fashioned AID, where it's injected directly in her body, and that's where fertilization takes place. And the newer type, it's not so new anymore, but the newer type of AID, where donor sperm fertilizes the egg in vitro, which is then transferred to her body. Okay, but the common denominator of both of those scenarios is that it is donor sperm. But now let's talk about AIH. AIH is artificial insemination with husband's sperm. Yeah. You want to say?
Yeah, I was going to ask about, I guess you're going to talk about it in a second, but what about why, this is like kind of fun, why would someone choose to do IVF versus
Okay, yeah, no,
getting-
you're 100% correct. Why go through IVF? Yeah. There are going to be reasons. I'll give you one example from the male perspective. Number one, when sperm is injected in the woman's body, the sperm has to travel and find the egg, and it could be a hit or miss thing. With IVF, they target it. They're right. The sperm and the egg is right there. So sometimes it is easier, much easier, to get a pregnancy through an IVF than through an AID. So there are medical reasons. Yes, certainly, if someone is going to a fertility doctor, you talk about all of these options, meaning it is absolutely easier to do an AID than an IVF. A lot of abbreviations here, that's how people talk, because IVF requires surgery, AID does not require surgery. But sometimes IVF may have a higher success rate, so that's why they would do it, and the like. Okay, let me also point out that with an IVF, they take out more than one egg, meaning to say, in an AID, there's only one egg that can be fertilized. In an IVF, they can take 20 eggs, and therefore there's a much higher chance of a
Are
pregnancy.
these all being out?
Well, I'm going to talk about it for now. I mean, basically they are allowed. Well, AID are the shilas we just talked about. Can you have donor semen? But general IVF with husband's sperm, well, that's what I'm up to right now. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears, and instead of talking about donor sperm, we're going to talk about husband's sperm. Now, you may ask, if it's going to be husband's sperm that's fertilizing wife's egg, then why do anything? That's a regular marriage, just regular relationship. Well, the answer is that sometimes you still need some artificial procedure, because an example would be, let's say the husband has what is called a low sperm count, meaning in a given ejaculate, there are not a lot of sperm. So with an AIH, we can get a number of sperm samples, and then we can combine them, and then instead of a low count, you have a high count, right? So there are reasons. Well, so one reason why AIH would be helpful is for men that have a low sperm count. That's one reason. But I'll give you another reason why AIH might be helpful, and this is connected to the laws of Nida. And let's go over this a little bit. This is actually a very, very fascinating issue. And that is, we know that under the laws of Taras HaMishpacha, a woman has to be separated from her husband for at least 12 days a month. At least 12 days. The first 5 days, starting from the beginning of a period. And then, if she's no longer bleeding, after checking herself, there are 7 days without bleeding. These are called the 7 clean days. And then she can go to the mikveh and they can resume. Now, if she's still bleeding after 5 days, she cannot start the 7 clean days. In other words, she cannot start the 7 clean days till all bleeding has stopped. It's a minimum of 5. It could be a maximum. The maximum is, there is no maximum. It could go on, and then it's a very, very serious problem. So it turns out, therefore, that a woman cannot be with her husband till the 13th day from the start of menstruation. In other words, 12 days, and then that night, right? Now, the problem is that some women ovulate on the 11th, 10th or 11th day from their period. Now, you know that a woman generally is fertile for only around 72 hours a month. In other words, 24 hours before and maybe 48 hours after, or vice versa. There's a 72-hour window. So the problem is, for some women, by the time they go to the mikveh, they can't get pregnant anymore because they ovulated on day 11, and by day 13, it's beyond the window. Now, most women, it's not. Most women, it works out perfectly. Most women ovulate kind of on day 12, and mikveh works perfectly. The night mikveh night is mamash in the fertile period. Hashem made it that way, that it works out that ovulation is tied into going to the mikveh. But some women, it doesn't work that way. So what do you do? What do you do when a woman ovulates 2 or 3 days before she goes to the mikveh? And it's especially going to be difficult for women who have very heavy periods, because they may not go to the mikveh till the 14th or the 15th day from the start of menstruation. So even if they ovulate on day 12, which is the normal mikveh date, it's still going to be beyond it. So what's interesting is, some poskim have said that even though intercourse is strictly prohibited when a woman is a nida, obviously, but impregnation with the husband's sperm, not through intercourse, would be mutter even before she goes to the mikveh. So the point I'm making is, AIH is helpful both for male infertility problems, such as low sperm count, and for certain types of female infertility problems, namely ovulation more than a day before she goes to the mikveh. Because and this is a big chiddush. In other words, impregnation with husband's sperm is not considered prohibited under the laws of nida, and that would be a solution. There may be other solutions as well, but for now, let's just mention that one. Okay, so the question is, if the fertility doctor advises the couple that the husband should give sperm and we will impregnate you with the sperm either through AIH or IVF, either way, is it mutter for the husband to give his sperm that way? So here we reach a very, very difficult problem. Again, forgive me for being so explicit, but it is Torah and halacha. So
What are we asking?
I'm asking, can a husband give sperm to give to his wife? And here we get into the whole issue of masturbation. And that is the following. How does a husband give sperm? I mean, he's not having relations with his wife. How does he give sperm? So normally, masturbation is considered to be, male masturbation is considered to be a very big sin. This is the sin that is called wasting seed. Hotsa'as zera levatala. The emission of seed, sperm, levatala, for naught. Masturbation is forbidden in that way. If you remember, according to Chazal, this was the sin of Er and Onan. Who is Er and Onan? We're going to read about them in 2 weeks. If you remember, Yehuda had a daughter-in-law whose name was Tamar, and Tamar married Yehuda's oldest son, who was called Er, and it says Er did evil in the eyes of God, doesn't say what he did, and God killed him. And then Onan, the next brother, married, and says Onan also did evil in the eyes of God, and Onan died. And if you remember the rest of the story, a fascinating story, Yehuda had a third son. He didn't want Tamar to marry his third son because he thought anyone who marries Tamar drops dead. So Tamar was left like a widow, and she dressed up as a prostitute. She enticed Yehuda. She got pregnant from Yehuda. Remember, you know the whole story. And Yehuda admitted that he was the one. And from that union came eventually Boaz and David HaMelech and Mashiach, right, from the union of Yehuda and Tamar. But Chazal point out that the Torah does not say what was the sin of Er and Onan. So the explanation is that Tamar was very beautiful, and they didn't want to mar Tamar's beauty by her getting pregnant. So what they would do is they would have relations with her, but when it became time to ejaculate the sperm, they withdrew and they spilled their seed on the ground. And this was called evil in the eyes of Hashem, and Hashem killed them, and that is the halachic source, actually, for the laws against male masturbation, the wasting of seed, and the like. Right, so the question becomes, if the husband is giving zera through that particular procedure in a doctor's office or whatever it is there not a prohibition of masturbation, of being motzi zera levatala? In fact, the Zohar writes that this is the most chomer aveira in the Torah, and there's no tshuva. But the Alter Rebbe writes that the Zohar should not be taken totally literally. The Alter Rebbe writes that in fact, it's important to know this, men need to know it, that in fact every Aveira of the Torah does have tshuva. That there's no such thing as no tshuva, but it's the Zohar is just stressing how severe the Aveira is. But one should never feel that there's no tshuva. That's an important yesod. Even avodah zarah, even if I reject Hashem, even if I worshipped idols, I can always do tshuva for it. Okay, but be it as it may, therefore, how does a husband give sperm if there's this issue of masturbation? So as a result, there are two different approaches. Approach number one is that the husband should give the sperm only in the context of intercourse, which is then retrieved. This is very awkward. It doesn't work very well. That means to say, husband has relations with his wife, and then they rush to the doctor's office, and the husband takes the sperm out of her body and aggregates it with other samples. You can imagine this is very, very cumbersome, and it's probably not going to work very well. And to have intercourse in the doctor's office is considered to be a total no-no. So I wouldn't call this a practical. Other opinions say that this is not called wasting sperm, because since the purpose of getting this sperm is not to avoid pregnancy, but to create pregnancy, this is not er v'onan. Er v'onan, we're wasting seed not to have a child. This is to have a child, and therefore it would be mutter. So we'll just assume, without getting into too many of the gritty details, that the husband is permitted to donate sperm in that way. But even then, you have to be careful, because a lot of times fertility clinics want testing over and over and over and over and over again, just giving multiple samples just to be tested, and that is actually not proper. In other words, the basic idea is you give it to be used for fertility, not for testing and the like. Okay. Now, so be it as it may, assuming for a moment that the husband could give this sperm, so this is how AIH works, either directly into the woman's body, or if she's, or through an in vitro fertilization procedure. AIH is done all the time. I mean, if any couple has fertility problems, this is what they're going to do, either in vitro or directly into the woman's body. So halachically, it's a well-accepted point. The only thing you have to be sure of is be sure there's hashgacha, so that the sperm doesn't get switched with a donor sperm, as I mentioned before.
So halachically it's okay?
Halachically it is okay. Some rabbis say it's only mutter if they've been married for 10 years without children. Others say as soon as there is a diagnosis of infertility, they can do it. You don't need to wait 10 years when you have a diagnosis. Okay?
You also have to make sure that there is no testing, it's going straight.
Well, yeah, you try to minimize the testing. It may have to be one test, but you try to have all the sperm used, not just destroyed or the like. Okay. Now, let's talk about one common thing of AIH, which is in vitro fertilization. This would be a situation where the husband's giving sperm, the husband's own sperm, it's the wife's egg, but instead of the sperm going into her body, it's going to be an in vitro fertilization. Are there any unique problems with in vitro fertilization? So here's the very interesting thing. The way in vitro fertilization works, now how old is in vitro fertilization? It's much newer than stem artificial insemination. Artificial insemination is more than 100 years old. I mean, they did that 100 years ago already. But in vitro fertilization, where the pregnancy takes place in the dish, that only dates to 1980. The very first in vitro baby, her name was Louise Brown. Louise Brown is already a bubby. She already has grandchildren. And initially, it was thought that in vitro children had a higher incidence of mental retardation and some other problems. But Baruch Hashem, that's not a problem now. In vitro kids are just as good as everybody else. But here is the problem with in vitro. In vitro fertilization, number one, involves surgery. The woman must be put under general anesthesia, and the eggs are taken out of her body. Number one. Number two, they're not going to just take out one egg, because one egg, they're not going to do surgery to take out one egg, because the chances of the one egg getting fertilized are not very high. So what they do is, before the surgery, they give the woman very powerful hormonal drugs to induce what is called hyperovulation or superovulation, to ripen a lot of eggs. And what they will do is, they will remove from her body not one egg or two eggs. They will remove from her body 20 eggs. And therefore, in the petri dish, right, the laboratory dish, where they're putting the man's sperm, they're exposing the man's sperm to 20 eggs. Okay? So here's the problem. If out of those 20 eggs, only one gets fertilized, so that's simple. We transfer the fertilized egg. And what do you do with the rest of the eggs? Well, you could throw them away if you want, or you can freeze them for later use, like egg freezing. There is no issue to throw away the eggs. You don't have to use, unlike sperm, where you can't waste sperm, there actually is no halacha, don't waste eggs.
How would we know though?
How do you know?
Because like when I don't know, they wouldn't write about it in the Gemara because IVF wasn't a thing then. So why would they even consider the issue of throwing out eggs? Because it wasn't something that was possible.
No. Well, yeah, but again, we go back with this idea that unless you have a reason to say something's usher, the default rule is it's mutter, meaning you have to find a halacha that you're violating. If you don't have a halacha that you're violating, it's going to be mutter mimela. So here's the problem. If one egg gets fertilized, you put one egg in her body. If two eggs get fertilized, that's fine. What if, though, if you have 20 eggs exposed to sperm, it is possible that all 20 are fertilized. Or 10, or 8, or 9. So one of the problems in vitro fertilization, these are called embryos, right? When sperm fertilizes an egg, it's no longer just called an egg. It's now called an embryo. What do you do? So what do you do with spare eggs is not a halachic problem. Spare eggs can be discarded or frozen. That's fine. But a spare embryo is a real problem. Because once you have an embryo, you have the beginning of a human being. At that point, if you destroy an embryo, you're doing an abortion. You see, it's an abortion outside of the woman's body.
Are you? Because I thought it was supposed to be like 40 days.
So that's going to be the question. That's what we're going to discuss. So the most difficult issue halachically in vitro fertilization is, what do you do with what are called spare or surplus fertilized embryos? Now, I want to point out that even before you get to halacha, when you sign up for an IVF program, you have to sign a contract. Now, it makes a difference if it's a Jewish hospital, not Jewish hospital, from or not from. There has to be a contract. There's a contract. And the contract will be, one of the things in the contract is, what should we do with fertilized embryos? So,
Freeze them?
huh?
Could those be?
Okay, so now I'm going to give you a list. I'm going to give you a list, and next week we'll discuss. You can think about it for a whole week, which are halachically kosher and which are not halachically kosher. But I'll give you a list of everything. Option 1, implant everything.
Once?
Implant everything. Now that would depend on the number, right? but so whatever is fertilized, I want to implant it. That's option 1. Option 2, implant up to a certain number, so that could be anything. Implant 1 or 2 or 3, and the rest freeze for later implantation, because embryos can be frozen as well, not just eggs. Embryos, fertilized embryos, can be frozen for later use. Right? So option 1 is total implantation. Option 2 is partial implantation with embryo freezing, which is also looking to future implantation. Future. And this could be over 20 years. You can say, 1 year this, 1 year that, etc. Option 3, donate the embryo to other infertile couples so they could have a child. I'm just giving you options. I'm not discussing the halachas yet. Option 4, donate the embryo for scientific experimentation, which essentially means it'll be destroyed. And option 5 is really the same thing. Just destroy it. Either passively let it disintegrate or actively destroy it. Okay. In other words, when you sign an IVF contract, you and your husband will be asked to initial or check one of these choices. Again, this is just a matter of the hospital has to have a policy. Implantation, freezing for later use, donation to infertile couples, donation to scientific experimentation, or destruction. Actually destroy it. Flush it down the toilet or whatever. So the question we're going to discuss next week, and you can think about this during the week, something you think about, is if you're a religious couple and you want to follow halacha and you're in an in vitro fertilization protocol, what are the options that you're allowed to agree to for these extra embryos, and what are you not allowed to agree to, and what would the reasons be? Okay, so we'll talk about that next week. Yeah.
Is implantation guaranteed to work?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely
Okay, so
not.
you can implant embryos
And then miscarry, or not.
all of it, or just
Well, anything. Basically, IVF. Number one, the fertilization is not guaranteed, but assuming you have fertilized embryos, if the embryos are transplanted to the woman's body, they may attach to the uterine wall, or they may not. Or there may be spontaneous miscarriages. Not all. It's not all or nothing. Some will miscarry and some will not. You don't know. You just don't know. But the only thing is, it's obvious, is it not, that the more embryos you implant, the higher the risk of miscarriages, right? To put 10 embryos in a woman, it's very likely that all 10 might die. right? So you got to pick a safe number. Now, a few years ago, we had Octomom. Do you remember? Octomom? Octomom was a woman who actually
gonna
did,
ask about that.
through in vitro fertilization, she had eight embryos implanted. 8. And all 8 were born healthy. Now, the doctor that did this got in a lot of trouble because the doctors are not supposed to do this because it's so high risk and it's so unlikely. But Baruch Hashem, it happened to be that all 8 are fine.
There are higher rates of triplets and twins in general with IVF.
Well, even twins are high risk. Twins are higher risk, yeah.
Right, but there are higher rates with IVF.
Yes, that's correct. That is correct. But this was 8. 8 is kind of a, well, in Mitzrayim we had many children born at one time, but that was a miracle. But 8 is kind of a record, really. 8. Now it used to be. It's not so much anymore. It used to be in the olden days, like the 50s or 60s, if you had quintuplets, everybody gave you money, so you became rich. So in a way, it was a way of almost getting rich because it was such an unusual thing. But I think Octomom didn't do so well economically. I think she was hoping to. She was a single mother, number one. She didn't have a husband.
Really?
She was a single mother. She was on welfare, and now she has 8 kids all at once. And I don't think the money came through, which is kind of again a difficult massive to be in. So things get harder. It used to be quintuplets you got rich, but now even octuplets don't work. People are less impressed today. I don't know. Okay, so next week, Mr. we'll go over the different options and what the halachic issues are with them. Okay, you'll have a good week, a good chodesh.
Thank you.
Okay.